Content warning. This audiobook contains strong language, sexual themes, supernatural elements, and graphic depictions of death. The author recommends this work for audiences aged 18 and over. If you let your 6-year-old listen, that's on you. Dark Matter, The Order of the Hidden Cross, by Ian Bailey, published by Ashlar Press. Copyright 2025. Chapter 4. Flavius and Caius. The door loomed before them, heavy and silent, its presence gnawing at the edges of Flavius's thoughts. Over the years, monks have carved their names into the wood as a mark of existence. "I was here," said one with no context for who it was. "I've been thinking," he muttered, casting a glance toward the dim, cold cell that lay just beyond them. "This guy's been here for so long. Don't you wonder who he really is? I mean, I doubt anyone remembers anymore." Caius shot him a sharp look, his voice low and dangerous. "Shut up, idiot. You don't want to be caught asking questions." Flavius hesitated but pressed on, quieter this time. "But don't you wonder why they keep him locked away? All these years, and no one speaks of him." Flavius's voice dropped to a whisper, his stomach nodding as Caius's glare cut through the dim light. "I said shut up," Caius hissed, cutting him off. "You know the rules," Caius snapped, his hand brushing the hilt of his blade. "Keep asking questions, and it won't just be the prisoner locked away." A faint scraping sound echoed from the cell, so soft it could have been imagined. Flavius stiffened, his eyes darting toward the door. Caius didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened, and his hand hovered near his weapon. The corridor fell silent again, but this time it wasn't natural. The air seemed to hum with a faint vibration, barely perceptible, like a breath held too long. Flavius glanced at Caius, but his companion's gaze was fixed on the door. For a moment, Caius's expression faltered, his confidence replaced by something Flavius hadn't seen before. Fear. Chapter 5. The Ritual Begins. "Joshua, where are you?" Zivah's voice echoed through the small room, a hint of unease in her tone. She could have sworn she heard whispers. Out from behind the old wooden bench, Joshua scrambled forward, his little hands dusty, eyes wide with mischief. "Here I am, Mama." His voice was bright, innocent, just like any 5-year-old's. "Did you miss me?" Zivah sighed in relief, smiling down at him, though her heart still raced. "What were you doing back there?" "Playing with my friend," Joshua said, glancing back toward the shadowed corner behind the bench. "He's really fun." Zivah frowned. "Friend? Who's back there?" She stepped closer, peering into the shadows, but saw nothing. Joshua beamed. "Just a friend, Mama. He does cool tricks. He can make things disappear and come back again. Sometimes he disappears too. He's really good at it." Her smile faltered. "Really? Well, maybe your friend can join us for supper?" Joshua turned and looked toward the shadows. "I'll go ask him." He ran back behind the bench, crouching low, whispering to someone just out of sight. Zivah took a step closer, heart thumping harder now. The shadows seemed to move, to thicken. Joshua's small voice came again. "He says he can't come now." "He's busy." Joshua paused, tilting his head as if listening to something only he could hear. Then he added in a whisper, "But he'll come back later." Zivah's heart skipped, her hand tightened on the back of the bench. "Joshua, who are you talking to?" Joshua stood up slowly, his face serious, the childish grin gone. "My friend. But you scared him away." Zivah's breath caught. "What's his name?" "I can't say it," Joshua said, a strange gleam in his eyes. "It's a secret name." Her stomach twisted, but she forced a smile. "Oh, okay then. Come on, let's eat." At the table, Joshua picked at his food, fidgeting in his seat, his eyes darting around the room as if waiting for something or someone. Zivah watched him closely. He'd always been a picky eater, but tonight felt different. "Eat your supper," Zivah said firmly, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "You need to eat everything to grow big and strong." Joshua paused, his fork hovering over the food. "Like Malleck?" he asked suddenly, his tone shifting, a seriousness that felt far too old for a boy his age. Zivah froze, the name unfamiliar and unsettling. "Malleck? Who's Malleck?" Joshua chewed thoughtfully, his eyes distant as if remembering something from long ago. "You remember him, Mama. He was the biggest of the ones who came to see me when I was born." Zivah's heart pounded in her chest. "Joshua, what are you talking about?" "You know." "The ones that came when I was born," Joshua said casually, but his gaze was far too focused. "Malleck was there. He said he'd protect me." Zivah blinked, her mouth dry. "Who told you his name?" Joshua smiled faintly. "I just know it. I remember everything." That night, after putting Joshua to bed, Zivah lingered outside his room, unsettled. She could hear him talking softly, but the words were too quiet, too strange. Curiosity, or maybe fear, compelled her to peek through the crack in the doorway. Her blood turned to ice. There, sitting on the edge of Joshua's bed, were 6 beings. Shadows made flesh, their shapes flickering in and out of focus as if they were only half real. Their eyes glowed faintly, focused entirely on Joshua. He didn't sound like himself anymore. His voice, usually light and innocent, now held a chilling authority. "They accused you," Joshua said softly, addressing one of the beings. "But they were wrong. I will free you from the in-between." Zivah's heart hammered in her chest. These weren't imaginary friends. They were real. One of the beings, a tiny fury figure barely 4 inches tall, spoke in a trembling voice. How did I get stuck here?" Joshua closed his eyes, his small face suddenly far too calm and wise. "You were careless," he said, his voice low, resonant. "You tried to steal from someone too powerful for you." Zivah pressed her back against the wall, fear clawing at her. How did her son know these things? How could he remember things that had never been spoken of? Her mind raced, flashing back to the night of his birth, to the strange figures that had watched from the shadows. Without warning, Joshua's head tilted slightly, his voice softening but never losing that strange authority. "Mum's watching us." The beings turned in unison, their glowing eyes fixing on the crack in the door. Zivah's heart nearly stopped. She stepped back, her breath ragged, but before she could move, the door creaked and slowly closed as if obeying an unseen command. Zivah stumbled back from the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door had closed on its own. Joshua had made it close. But how? She pressed her palms against her temples, trying to steady her breathing, to quiet the frantic thoughts racing through her mind. "This isn't real," she told herself. But the memory of his birth, the strange whispers, the shadows that moved when no one looked, everything she had brushed aside as her own paranoia now rushed back with terrifying clarity. But the memory of those glowing eyes, fixed on her in eerie unison, was too vivid to be a dream. For a moment, Zivah stood frozen in the hallway, her back pressed against the cold wall, trying to decide what to do. Should she go back in and confront whatever was happening? Or should she run? Call for help? But help from whom? No one knew. No one could know about Joshua, about his birth, about the strange things he remembered. She had kept it secret all these years, brushing it off as childish imagination. But now, she wasn't so sure. The air around her seemed heavier now, charged with something unnatural. She swallowed hard, gathering her courage, and crept quietly back toward the door. Maybe she'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe Joshua was just dreaming, talking in his sleep, and the rest was some trick of the light. Zivah pressed her ear to the door again, holding her breath. Inside, Joshua's voice continued, but now it was softer, almost a whisper. The others, those shadowy beings, remained silent, but their presence was unmistakable. They were listening to him with rapt attention, like soldiers awaiting their command. "We have to find the way back," Joshua was saying, his tone calm but authoritative. "The old paths are closed, but there are others. I know where to look." One of the creatures, a figure tall and thin, its edges flickering like smoke, spoke in a low rasp. "The boy is too young. The power may consume him." Joshua laughed softly. "I'm not too young." "I've been here before." Zivah's breath hitched in her throat. She couldn't understand what he meant. How could her son, barely 5 years old, be speaking like this? How could he have such knowledge, such control? What is happening? "How will we find the paths, Master?" a new voice asked. This one was deeper, more commanding, yet filled with reverence. "Through the great hall of memories," Joshua replied. "I can access it. I've already been there, and I'll return again." Zivah's skin prickled. The hall of memories. The name itself stirred something deep within her, a faint recollection from stories she had long forgotten, stories whispered by her grandmother in hushed tones when Zivah had been a child herself. The silence in the room thickened. Zivah dared to peer through the keyhole in the door, just for a moment. The others were still there, their shadowy forms seated in a loose circle around the bed. Joshua was in the center, his small body rigid, his face calm, serene, almost unnaturally so. He sat with his hands clasped in his lap, his eyes half closed, as if in deep thought, or something far darker. "We'll need the items for the ritual," Joshua said suddenly, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Water, bread, a knife, and a chalice. I think Mama has them in the kitchen." Zivah's breath caught in her throat. "A ritual? We can't do it now, Master," one of the figures protested, its voice thin and whistling. "The time isn't right." Joshua shook his head, his expression tightening. "I decide when the time is right. We do it now. He's waiting for us." The others shifted uneasily, their glowing eyes flickering like embers in the dark. "But Malleck," the voice began again before being cut off by a sharp gesture from Joshua. "Enough," Joshua snapped, his voice filled with an authority no child should possess. "I know what I'm doing." Zivah's heart raced. She had to stop this. Whatever it was, whatever Joshua was planning, she couldn't let it happen. She wasn't sure what this ritual was or who this Malleck was, but the mere mention of his name sent a shiver down her spine. She stepped back from the door, her mind racing. If she stormed in, if she confronted him, what would happen? Would Joshua even recognize her in this state? Or had something else taken over her son entirely? Suddenly, the door creaked open on its own. Zivah gasped, stumbling backwards as Joshua stood in the doorway, his eyes wide, innocent. He smiled up at her as though nothing strange had happened at all. "Mama?" he asked softly. "Why are you out here?" Zivah's mouth went dry. She stared at him, unable to find her voice. He looked so normal. His face round and soft, full of the boyish charm she was used to. But behind his eyes there was something else, something watching her, waiting. I heard you talking," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Who were you talking to, Joshua?" Joshua's smile widened, but there was something unsettling in it now, a coldness behind the sweetness. "Just my friends, Mama. They had to go, but they'll be back." Zivah swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. What were you talking about?" Joshua's eyes flickered. He tilted his head, almost as if weighing whether or not to tell her the truth. Then he smiled again, that same innocent, eerie smile. "Just stories, Mama. Just stories." Later that night, after Zivah had finally convinced herself to leave Joshua alone and return to her room, the house fell into an eerie quiet, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, like the world itself was holding its breath. Joshua lay in his bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. The shadows in the corners of the room twisted and writhed, alive with the presence of the others. But now they were quiet, waiting. He turned his head slightly, as if listening to something far away. Then he whispered, "It's time." The shadows stirred, and one by one, the others appeared again, flickering into being, their forms half real, half illusion. They gathered around Joshua, their glowing eyes fixed on him with reverence. "Master," one of them rasped, its voice low and reverent, "is the time truly now?" Joshua nodded, his face serene. "Yes, we will bring him back." He slid out of bed, moving with a grace far beyond his years, and crept silently down the hall to the kitchen. The others followed him, their forms barely making a sound as they glided through the darkness. In the kitchen, Joshua gathered the items he needed: a chalice, a loaf of bread, and a small knife. His tiny hands worked quickly, efficiently, as though he had done this 1,000 times before. The others watched in silence, their eyes glowing softly in the dim light. While he's there, he notices a strange presence, another being, tall, in black cloth and floating while hiding in the dark corner of the room, just off the kitchen. Joshua pretends not to have seen him and observes what it does while he is collecting everything he needs. This mysterious being just grins and moves further back into the shadow until it's gone. And the only thing left was a small mist dissipating and a smell so delicious his mouth waters just thinking about it. Joshua knows this being, the elusive creature that it is. It prefers people to think it doesn't exist. That's how it can manipulate humans to do what it wants, and they have no idea why they do them. They just do. It takes great joy in this game. Joshua knows this game too, and somehow the creature knows he knows it. Joshua gets the feeling he'll be back. As he returned to his room, Joshua paused for a moment, his gaze drifting toward his mother's room. Zivah was asleep, her chest rising and falling gently, her face peaceful. Joshua smiled faintly, but it was not a smile of love or warmth. It was a smile of understanding, a smile of someone who knew far more than he should. Joshua placed the chalice and loaf of bread on the floor in the center of his room, arranging the items with careful precision. The others, those strange half-shadow beings, formed a circle around him, their eyes gleaming in the darkness like dim embers. The air was heavy, thick with the weight of something unseen, something ancient. Joshua took a deep breath, closing his eyes, and the others followed suit, their forms flickering, their bodies barely solid in the dim light. Their presence felt oppressive, as though the space they occupied was bending under the strain of forces that didn't belong in this world. He opened his eyes slowly, his face expressionless, his hands steady as he lifted the small knife. Hic est sanguis meus novi testamenti, qui pro multis effundetur in remissionem peccatorum. His voice was calm, reverent, as if he'd spoken these words countless times. "This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for the many, for the release of sins." With a deliberate movement, Joshua sliced the tip of his finger, letting the blood drip into the chalice. As each drop fell, the water inside darkened, turning red like wine, or something far more ancient and primal. The others shifted slightly, murmuring in low voices, their words incomprehensible, their shapes vibrating with a strange energy. They watched Joshua closely, their loyalty unquestioning, their eyes never leaving him. Joshua placed the knife down carefully and picked up the loaf of bread. He held it out before him, his small hands steady, his face calm and focused. Hoc est corpus meum, quod pro vobis traditur. Hoc facit in meam commemorationem. His voice, though soft, carried an undeniable authority. This is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. He tore the bread in two, placing it on the floor beside the chalice. The room grew colder, the temperature plummeting as though a door to another world had been opened, allowing something dark and ancient to creep through. The shadows in the corners of the room deepened, swirling like smoke, thickening with every word Joshua spoke. He closed his eyes again, taking a deep breath, as if drawing in the very essence of the air around him. Surge, Malleck, et dimitam te de servitut tua, ut consurgas ante me. Joshua's voice was low, a whisper that seemed to resonate far beyond the walls of the room. Rise, Malleck, I release you from your bondage. I command you to rise before me. The others leaned in closer, their eyes glowing more intensely, their forms rippling as though they were being pulled toward something unseen. They repeated the words with him, their voices blending into a haunting chorus. Surge, Malleck, et dimitam te de servitut tua, ut consurgas ante me. The room seemed to shudder, the very air vibrating with the weight of the incantation. The symbols Joshua had drawn on the floor began to glow faintly, pulsing with a sickly light. The blood in the chalice rippled as though something inside it was waking. Surge, Malleck, et dimitam te de servitut tua, ut consurgas ante me. Joshua repeated, his voice growing stronger, more insistent. The others joined in, their chant merging into a haunting hum that filled the room, vibrating with unnatural energy. Outside the door, Zivah stood in the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard Joshua leave his room earlier, moving silently through the house, but she hadn't followed. Something inside her had told her not to, something primal, some instinct that warned her not to witness what her son was doing. But now, as she stood outside his door, she could feel the air around her shift, growing colder and heavier. She pressed her hand against the door frame, unsure whether to push the door open or run the other way. The silence was deafening. Then she heard Joshua's voice again, clear, commanding, far too powerful for a child of his age. Surge, Malleck, et dimitam te de servitut tua, ut consurgas ante me. The floor beneath her feet seemed to vibrate as though the very earth was responding to the words. Zivah swallowed hard, her throat dry, and leaned closer to the door. She couldn't see anything, but she could feel it. Something was happening inside that room. Something terrible. Inside the room, Joshua's face was set with determination, his eyes locked on the chalice and the bread before him. The others were still, waiting, their bodies barely visible in the dim light. The air itself seemed to bend and warp, a strange distortion that made the walls seem closer, the shadows darker. Joshua raised his hands over the chalice. Surge, Malleck. His voice faltered just for a second, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. The others stirred, their eyes narrowing. He clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. I command you to rise. Suddenly, the shadows around the room swirled violently as though some unseen force had been unleashed. The symbols on the floor flared bright, casting a sickly red glow that filled the room. The chalice shook violently, the blood inside rippling, trembling, as though something within it was trying to break free. The others stepped back, their forms blurring as the energy in the room intensified. Joshua remained still, his eyes locked on the glowing symbols. Come forward, Malleck, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing hum of energy. I free you from your chains. Rise, rise, and serve me. The air in the room grew thick, oppressive, as though all the oxygen had been sucked out. The others began to murmur, their voices low, uncertain. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the room, like thunder striking the ground. The chalice shattered, spilling the blood-red liquid across the glowing symbols. The shadows recoiled violently, swirling faster and faster around the room before vanishing entirely, leaving only a thick, unnatural silence in their wake. Joshua stood frozen, staring at the broken chalice, his face expressionless. The others looked at one another, unsure of what had just happened. They had expected something, someone, to rise from the in-between. But the room was empty, save for the shattered remnants of the ritual. Zivah, still standing outside the door, heard the silence fall like a heavy weight. She felt a deep, cold fear settle in her bones, a knowing that whatever had just happened wasn't over. Something had changed, something had shifted, but she didn't understand what. Inside, Joshua finally exhaled, his breath slow and measured. He knelt, dipping his finger into the spilled blood, tracing a single symbol onto the floor. The others watched him closely, their eyes still glowing faintly in the dark. "It didn't work, did it?" one of them murmured, his voice tinged with disappointment. Joshua looked up slowly, his eyes gleaming with something unreadable. "Not yet," Joshua said, a faint smile curling his lips as he traced another symbol on the floor with his blood. His voice softened, almost reverent. "But he's listening now, and when he comes, the veil will thin," Joshua murmured, his gaze fixed on the blood-soaked symbols. "And they'll all see what lies beyond the veil," Joshua murmured, his gaze unwavering. "What was hidden will be revealed, and no one will be able to look away." This chapter may have ended, but the story doesn't. Return next Monday for what waits in the dark. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and leave a comment to share what the shadows may have whispered to you.